Welcome back, Wiz and Weebers, to the Child Edition Doge, where today I'm going to be covering the Bloons Tower Defense fan game, BTDX. You might not have heard of this, although I imagine most of you will have. Essentially, the wait between BTD 5 and BTD 6 was a long one, and during that drought of Bloons content, this fan game came in to save us. Made by Ramath Party, you can essentially think of this game as Bloons Tower Defense 5.5. And honestly, it's kind of eerie how many BTD6 features that BTDX predicted before BTD6 came out. But if this is like a BTD 5.5, then now BTD6 is out, what is the worth in coming back to a game like this? Well, if I was going to explain it the short way, I'd say it's BTD 5.5, but there are a lot of things that BTDX has that BTD6 doesn't. So while I'm not trying to say BTDX is superior to BTD6, I genuinely consider them equally as good. I'm going to be telling you why you might want to play BTDX to this day, even though BTD6 is already out. So, what did BTDX add to the equation? From BTD5, of course. Again, BTD6 wasn't out at the time this game was made. Well, despite its very amateur-looking graphics, it is a very, very well-made game with a lot of content in it. Each tower has a total of 11 upgrades and 3 different upgrade paths. And in fact, I kind of lied there, they actually have 14 because a lot of them have secret alternate paths that they can also use. Of course, this game has a whole bunch of new towers, and brings back some old towers that didn't make the jump from BTD5 to BTD6. Well, okay, I'm just talking about the balloon chipper when I say that, but hey, it has the balloon chipper. But most of all, I think the amount of new balloons is what's impressive. The fact that this wasn't an official game allowed the developer Ramath Party to make a lot of new types of balloons that you probably wouldn't have ever seen in an official Bloons game, just because their mechanics are too weird or a little bit cryptic to very casual players to figure out. So we see balloons like, I think a good example would be the Hard Titanium Carrier, or the HTC, a MOAB class balloon which actually doesn't have a lot of health, but is still very tough, because if you try to hit it with any projectile with less than 10 pierce, it will take no damage. So you need to hit it with high pierce projectiles to hurt it, but typically high pierced projectiles are better against group balloons and aren't very good at single target damage. You can see how balloon designs like this can create a lot more interesting late game. Probably the biggest new thing with these balloons though is the fact that now your towers can be attacked. They can't ever be destroyed, but if a tower of yours is hit, it will be stunned, and until it's healed, which will happen over time eventually, but you can speed up with healing towers, it will stay stunned and unable to attack. All this combined with the fact that now lead is similar to camo in this game, in that you can have balloons that are lead and another type of balloon. For example, you can get lead ceramics in this game. And yeah, dealing with just the balloons in this game, there's a lot more you have to think about than in normal BTD6 or BTD5. That being said, I am going to be honest here, even if it is a detriment to the game. I will say that one thing that definitely makes it worse than BTD6 is the upgrade path system. You see, of course, again, this was made before BTD6, and the developer couldn't have known how upgrade paths were going to work in the next game. And the way they chose works from the perspective of a BTD5 player, but after you've played BTD6 with its much more interesting upgrade path system, it can be a bit disappointing to come back to this. Essentially, your first 2 upgrades you don't get to choose, it's always the first same 2 upgrades, and then the last 3 upgrades you get to pick from 3 paths. It is nice that you do have 3 upgrade paths, but there's no cross-pathing like picking which of the other 2-3 paths you want to get some upgrades on. You can't get 205s or anything like that. There's just the main 2 upgrades, and then do you take top path, middle path, or bottom path, which sadly does reduce the variety in towers. That being said though, the sheer amount of upgrades is a lot, even if the amount of upgrade combinations isn't so plentiful. And there is one upside to this change, and that is that because there are less available upgrade slots, a lot of old upgrades, while they still exist in the game, are packed together. A great example of this would be the Sniper Monkey. Back in BTD5, before you could actually pick a path, you would have 2 upgrades on the left path and 2 upgrades on the right path. The 2 upgrades on the left path were Full Metal Jacket, which let you pop 4 layers instead of 2 and pop lead balloons, and .50, which would let you deal 7 damage with 1 shot instead of 4. And then on the right path, there was faster firing to, shoot faster, and night vision goggles to see camo balloons. In BTDX, they combined these upgrades together and they only take up 2 slots in total. The 2 upgrades that you have to get and aren't bound to any path are the Full Metal Jacket upgrade, and then the next upgrade combines the other 3 all into one. They increase the damage to 7, they also make it see camo, and they also make it shoot faster. Not to mention, they also buffed Full Metal Jacket a little bit in this game, so that it makes it 5 damage instead of 4. Although it is still 7 damage when you get the next upgrade. Enough about the upgrades though, although there are some new upgrades, of course there's a decent amount of old ones. So let's look at the new towers. BTDX introduces 3 new towers to the formula that again sadly did not return in BTD6 because it's not an official game, BTDX is a fan game. Those being the Charge Tower, the Plasma Monkey, and the Alchemist. No, not that one. Yeah, this one. This is what I meant when I said there's some weird coincidences where this game exactly predicted BTD6. There's also an upgrade called Flying Fortress, only here it's the 5th tier for the Apache, not the Spectre. But anyway, I'm getting off track. So the new towers are relatively interesting overall. The Charge Tower is one of my personal favourites. It kind of does what you'd think. While it's not attacking, it will charge up, well, multiple charges, and then fire them all out. And this is a kind of tower that I'm surprised we haven't seen in Bloons yet. I'm trying to think, and I feel like there must have been one and I just forgot it. But I genuinely think that in Bloons Tower Defense, officially, we've never seen a tower that does this, which is kind of strange because it's a relatively common mechanic in other tower defense games. Honestly, if this just looked a bit more like a Bloons Tower, this feels like it'd fit right in with the official game. The only problem is, of course, that it doesn't look very Bloonsy. But in terms of how it plays, it does feel very nice. You can get upgrades that allow it to hold more charges, and you can also get upgrades that change how the charges are used. Like, for example, instead of just firing them off, maybe having them orbit around the tower, hitting balloons as it does so, it's kind of like the Glaive Lord's Glaives, or shooting them in an electronic beam. The Plasma Monkey is a relatively expensive tower that mostly deals well with single targets, although isn't particularly bad against group targets when upgraded a little more, and it's mostly just for pure damage. Disappointingly, it's not anywhere near as good as a Plasma Super Monkey, but for $1,000 of course it's not going to be. But it does have some very useful upgrades, especially the first path, which allows it to drain money from the balloons as it attacks them. Oh yeah, that's one of the other downsides I forgot to mention so far. You don't actually earn money during the round in BTDX. It gives you all the money for all the balloons you should have popped in that round at the end of the round. So you can't actually earn any money in the middle of a round in BTDX normally. You have to use tower abilities and upgrades that allow you to make money mid-round. I think this was to try and get around regrow farming, but I'm not sure exactly why, because again, there are still things like this money drain upgrade which still allow you to make money from balloons, so I'm not sure why they decided to do this. Either way, it doesn't ruin the game, it's just a little bit inconvenient. But let's get to the final tower I haven't mentioned yet, the Alchemist. Of course, it works completely different in this game because this is before we knew what the Alchemist would be like in BTD6. That being said though, it still fulfills a relatively similar role as a support tower. Most of its paths aren't that support orientated. It can create poisonous gas clouds that are good against group balloons, it can throw potions that deal splash damage, it can deal with lead balloons, and it can increase the damage of its potions and get potions that turn balloons into paper that can be one-hit killed. But for the most part, it's not really that much of a support tower until you start getting the higher tier upgrades on the first path, which will actually turn the balloons into gold, which is kind of just what it does in BTD6, which is weird. I need to stop finding similarities to BTD6. Okay, what about the third path? That one shouldn't be too similar, right? Oh hey look, it's the path where he throws potions on your monkeys which buff them. Okay, in fairness, in this game it's completely different. The buff is a attack speed buff only, and it also heals the tower if it's stunned. But still, it is really weird how similar of an idea they had here. While I do like this version of the Alchemist, and it's kind of sad that it's never going to be in the official version, I do have to admit, I think I do prefer the version that Ninja Kiwi made. With most of these, I actually do really like the unique kind of stuff that you would only see in BTDX, because these kind of mechanics wouldn't make it into an official Bloons game. But I have to admit that the Alchemist in this game, while I do kind of like it, does feel a little bit weird. Like, every time I get one, I'm always getting the buffing path. It's always the path I want, because it's supposed to be a support tower, and using it as a damage tower just feels kind of strange and like I'm not using it correctly. The first path can arguably be used as a support tower, but almost every time I buy this, I buy the third path. Although in fairness, it's kind of similar in the official Bloons game, isn't it? You almost always get the top path with the Alchemist in BTD6, even though, in fairness, the middle path is very useful with Unstable Concoction. This video is just meant to be an introduction to BTDX though, for anyone who's out of the loop with it. Though that being said, there is a little bit more that I think I should let you know about before I end this video. I'll be doing more videos on BTDX on more specific stuff, and I just want to give you enough context so that if you don't know anything about BTDX, you'll still be able to follow. That being said, if you want a more in-depth look at it, I'd either recommend you play it yourself or you look for some other videos, because unless a lot of you need an explanation more in depth of how this game works, I plan on mostly looking at a mod for this game that I've discovered that I really love playing, and not the base game itself. As I say, this is just to give you some context so you know what I'm talking about. But the last thing I think I need to cover is balloon types, because even though I quickly mentioned them earlier and talked about some of them like the hard titanium carrier, there are other balloon types in this game that I should probably explain, because you might be confused if you see them otherwise. Probably the earliest new balloon type you have to worry about this game are the tattered balloons. This is another type similar to camo or lead, only tattered isn't one where they need a certain type of upgrade to pop it. Tattered simply makes the balloon go really, really fast. And trust me, tattered pinks are terrifying. Literally, when you put it in fast forward, tattered pinks look like they're literally teleporting. But other than that, they are pretty easy to deal with as long as you have a tower that is able to hit balloons even if they are a little bit fast. If it's a tower that doesn't tend to miss much, then they aren't any stronger than a normal balloon for the most part. The next type of balloon you're most likely to run into are the bunched balloons. These will be slightly different from their normal colour, and when you pop them, they will have 3 of that balloon inside them. For example, an orange balloon will pop into 3 red balloons. These themselves are only really a mild threat in the early game if you have low pierce towers as your defense. However, they do become very threatening when they get regrow, because this makes them regrow farm even harder than rainbows. It's especially scary in impoppable mode, where before round 20, you get regrow bunched greens, which will very easily spiral out of control to an unmanageable amount if you don't have a way to kill them almost instantly, or just prevent the regrow farm. As I mentioned, lead is now a type in this game, so you can get things like lead ceramics, although you don't have to worry so much about lead MOABs. The only lead MOAB in the game is still the DDT in this game, which it does have. And luckily, camo lead doesn't exist in this game except for the DDT. You can't have something that's camo and lead and tattered or anything like that. Another balloon type, like all the ones I mentioned, is shield, and again, it can't overlap with anything like camo or lead. You can't have camo shielded yellows or anything like that, but you can get shielded balloons, which they are a pain. And in fact, they are probably going to be one of the biggest things you're going to struggle with when you try and first get into BTDX. These things are probably going to be what kills you most. Shielded balloons take extra damage to pop, as you might have guessed, kind of like fortifieds. Only they are much worse than fortifieds in BTD 6, because shielded balloons not only do increase the health by a lot, but also, if the shield isn't broken by a shot, it will delete the projectile that hit it. It will still take damage for doing it, but if a shot has 10 pierce and the first thing it hits is a shield, then it will just destroy the shot. The shot will not go through the shielded balloon. So groups of shielded balloons are really tough to deal with, because you can't just get a really high pierce tower to hit all of them and attack really fast, because that high pierce tower will only be shooting one of them at a time. It gets especially bad when stronger balloons like ceramics or brick balloons, a new type of balloon which is essentially ceramics but with triple health, start getting shields on them, because the stronger the balloon is, the stronger the shield will be. But it gets worse than shielded balloons. Probably the most terrifying type of balloon in this game are the static balloons. Static balloons are like shielded balloons, only their shields are even stronger, and on top of that, the static balloons are capable of stunning towers nearby them with static shock. Even just greens and yellows take a bit of a beating before popping when they're static balloons. Luckily though, the strongest static balloon that is available in the game is the static ceramic. For whatever reason, there doesn't seem to be a static brick balloon in the game, even though it should technically be possible. I'm guessing that's just because they realize a static brick balloon would be too annoying. Static ceramics are already terrifying in groups, so static brick balloons would be absolutely brutal. Those are most of the balloon types. There are some more in Nightmare mode, which introduces a lot of new balloon types, but I'm not going to touch that for now, because most of those balloon types exist only in Nightmare mode, and there's a lot of them in Nightmare mode, so we'd be here a while if I cover them all. Also, a lot of them are very gimmicky and technically not that important to learn unless you're going to be playing a lot of games in Nightmare mode. So if we're going to ignore Nightmare mode for now, then the only balloons left that I need to cover are some of the MOAB class balloons, because there's some interesting variants on them. There actually still isn't a balloon bigger than a Zomg in this game. Zongs are the biggest balloon in this game, again, outside of Nightmare mode. But that doesn't mean there aren't new MOABs in the game. There's actually quite a few. For one thing I was very surprised to see BTD6 not do is the mini MOAB from Bloons Super Monkey 2. I was really expecting to see in BTD6 when BTD6 came out, considering Bloons Super Monkey 2 came before it. And yes, if you're not familiar with this, the mini MOAB is just what it sounds like. It's a grey, small version of a MOAB that has less health than normal MOAB, but still pops into ceramics. You'll get this on round 40, and it'll be the first MOAB class boom you run into. Not much to say, they're just smaller MOABs. There's the hard titanium aircraft, which only takes 60 hits to pop, but as I mentioned, can only be hurt by projectiles with 10 or more pierce, and when it dies, it will drop 4 shielded prismatic balloons. Prismatic balloons are the name for bunched rainbows, as in rainbows that pop into 3 rainbows when you pop them. So yeah, the insides of this thing are quite terrifying despite the fact that the balloon itself is very low on health. There's the big rubbery carrier, or the BRC, which has a health total in between a MOAB and a BFB at 500. When it pops, it will drop 8 mini MOABs, so it will drop a lot more MOABs from inside it, but they'll all be mini MOABs that pop a lot faster than a normal MOAB. And the only other new MOAB class balloon that appears outside of Nightmare mode I haven't mentioned yet is the lightning-powered Zeppelin, the strongest new MOAB, again excluding Nightmare mode. This one appears on round 70, and it is essentially a giant static MOAB. It has a shield and periodically shoots stun projectiles at your towers. It takes 50 hits to remove the shield, but once the shield is removed, it will stop all towers attacking for 3 seconds if the stun isn't prevented or healed, and then take 300 hits to pop afterwards, and once the shield is broken, it will also speed up. It will drop 10 static ceramic balloons when popped as well, which are then also capable of stunning even more of your towers, and will also take quite a few hits to break open. Really though, I think the biggest reason to come back to BTDX post BTD6 launch is for this, the bosses. The bosses in BTDX get creative. A lot more creative than the bosses, which are already pretty cool in the official BTD6. They work very similar to how they were implemented in BTD6 as well, despite the fact this game predates BTD. You know, I'm gonna stop with that. Essentially, you start off going into a map, playing it like normal, until the boss shows up, usually around round 40, sometimes later, sometimes earlier. And in that time, you don't get to wait in between rounds. Rounds will start automatically, and you have to try and farm as much as you can to prepare for when the boss shows up. When the boss does show up, there's a variety of things that can happen. A lot of the time, what the boss will do will just simply be to go for your exit, and it will almost always have too much health to be popped before it can reach the exit. But when it reaches the exit, you do not die instantly for most of them. When it reaches the exit, you will lose some of your lives, and it will return back to the start, and it will keep looping around the track, taking more and more of your lives until either you pop it or you run out of lives. That's how they go most of the time, but of course, that's for the basic kind of bosses. You then get some more interesting ones later. A good example of one that's a bit more interesting without having to get too weird is the Blooming Balloon. The Blooming Balloon boss will appear at random spots on the map and then shoot out bursts of balloons that don't follow the track. They simply move outward from wherever they were shot from. And if those balloons manage to get off the screen, then you lose those lives. This is a lot more interesting because the Blooming Balloon can simply spawn somewhere miles away from the track and suddenly shoot a burst of balloons there, and now you need to have towers sitting in places that can't even see the track, because if the Blooming Balloon appears there and those towers aren't there, then you're dead. The Blooming Balloon isn't overall too hard to deal with, especially the heli is really, really good against it, but it's very shocking at first, and if you do ever reach a situation in which the Blooming Balloon shoots out a burst of balloons and you don't have any tower there to protect that burst of balloons and make sure they get popped before they fall off the screen, then often it can only take 1 or 2 bursts to fully kill you. This also gives a lot more use to lives in this game, since it's almost impossible to get through a boss fight without losing any lives. This is why that there's a lot more upgrades in BTDX that allow you to gain lives over time. For example, one of the new upgrade paths for the Balloon Chipper turns it into a Vampire Balloon Chipper, which does give you lives as it attacks. While in the main game and in the normal levels these upgrades aren't that useful, against some of the boss fights they're extremely helpful. But again, this is something that I'll probably go into more detail on another day. For now, I just want to give you a heads up of what this game is like. As I alluded to, the main reason I want to bring this up is just to give context, because I can't wait to talk about the More mod for this game, which I've been playing recently, which adds a lot more towers to the game, as well as some quality of life changes. In fact, you're seeing footage of the More mod right now. I'm just not using any of the modded content. I'm going to be making a series talking about every tower in the More mod and all of its upgrades. So I hope you're interested in this game, because I'll see you then when I get to cover all these new modded towers. Some of them get pretty crazy.